Hey, everybody. So Tim Alison here, host of the Screw the Naysayers podcast, and I'm delighted to have with me today Mitzi Perdue. So Mitzi is the widow of the late Frank Perdue and the author of Tough Man, Tender Chicken, Business and Life Lessons from Frank. The book reached number 5 in the Amazon rankings for business biographies. Mitzi currently writes for the Academy of Women's Health and also for GEN, which I've learned it stands for the Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. She's a nationally syndicated columnist for 22 years, has written over 1,600 articles, and is a nationally syndicated TV hostess and producer. She's produced more than 400 30-minute shows, and that kind of impresses me because I have enough time with the trouble with a 30-minute podcast. Mitzi is a graduate of both Harvard University and George Washington University, a former rice grower. She is the past president of the 35,000-member American Agri-Women American Agri-Women. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
And you know, how cool is that? It's amazing to see there's such a big membership too. It's the oldest and the largest American farm women's organization. She's also one of the U.S. delegates to the United Nations Conference on Women in Nairobi and was a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Libraries and Information Science. I'm honored and delighted to have you on the show, Mitzi. Welcome.
I'm totally thrilled to be on. And I have some news since the introduction that you gave. This is like, I learned it yesterday. You said American Agri-Women had 35,000 members.
Yeah.
That was correct up until just like yesterday. We're now at 40,000.
40,000. Good on American Agri-Women. Perfect number. So, Mitzi, I'm going to open with the same question that I ask all my guests, and I'm always interested to hear where you go with it. When you hear the word naysayers, what is the first thought or story that comes into your head?
Run like crazy.
I love it.
No, because I'm in business to encourage people and be encouraged. And anybody who's a naysayer to me, it's like, I don't know, an enemy army fighting against me. I don't want that. No way.
Yeah, it's really such timely advice right now too, isn't it? Because I mean, you know, businesses are facing some fairly unprecedented challenges, and in my opinion, I've been self-employed entrepreneur for 32 years, and in my opinion, one of the biggest risks right now is our mindset and hanging out with anybody that just wants to dwell on all the things we can't control and make us feel that that there's no hope type of thing. We have to surround ourselves with with positive energy.
Sort of slightly religion. I mean, we're not talking real religion, but
Sure.
something that guides me. And that is, I say that it's almost my religion to be upbeat, because where do you get the energy? Where do you get the focus if you're negative? No, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a moment ago kind of hard times that we're going through. I'd love to share something about my late father, if I might.
Please.
My late father was the co-founder of the Sheraton hotel chain. My uncle, actually my two uncles and my father were the founder of it in the 1930s. And in the 1930s, the absolute advice of absolutely everybody in real estate was run away from investments in hotels. I mean, that was just that was the received wisdom. Sheraton Hotels, which employed 20,000 at the time of my father's death, Sheraton Hotels began during the Great Depression at the exact time when everybody else was saying run away from it. And he figured out how to make them profitable, and the people who started working with him generally worked for him for life. And as I said, 20,000 people. So somebody with an upbeat, positive attitude who's not afraid to be a contrarian, look how far it took him.
Yeah, that's an amazing example, and thank you for sharing it, because it's it's so personal. I mean, but we see this in history, don't we? Every time there's big upheavals, whether it was the Roaring '20s, which followed the World War I and the Spanish flu, Sheraton in the Depression after the World Wars. Even if we go back as far as the recession, the first real big recession, some called it a depression in the 1890s in the United States, followed by the Model T, Alexander Graham Bell, the telegraph wire, these kind of things. Opportunities like I had a former Olympian on my show the other day, and Ruben Gonzalez put it this way. He said, "Tomorrow's champions are being forged today." And I thought it was such a great way of saying that, if you look for those opportunities, you really can, they're there.
Yeah, I'm totally ready to believe that 5 years from now that with technology and with just the genius of the world working on it, that we're going to have a world that's better than ever.
Yeah.
Although I'm braced for some stumbling blocks along the way.
Yeah.
But I wonder if our viewers and listeners might be interested in a question that I was forever asking my father, since we're back on
Absolutely.
how you turn things that are catastrophic into total wins.
Yeah.
I used to ask him as a little girl, how did you do it? Because it was real obvious to me that, he was a very successful man. We stayed at presidential suites. When he was around, people kind of bowed and scraped in front of him,
Yeah.
I meant to say.
Yeah.
And so I knew he was a really successful man. So this little 8-year-old, 10-year-old girl's asking me, how did you do it? And he used to tell stories of how he did do it. Because, and I suppose by the time I'm asking this kind of question, I'm probably 15 or 16. But here's what he said about why he was ready to rush into hotels when the rest of the world was running away from them. So he said that he discovered a principle of human nature, and it was the thing that enabled him to create employee engagement that meant people just made a habit of going the extra mile for him and staying with him for life. And he told me the following story, which I'm itching to share with our audience. He said when he'd take over a hotel, and remember 400 of them by the time of his death, when he'd first take over a hotel, and let's say we're back in early 1930s, when he's taking over a hotel, it's almost always that the hotel is on the verge of bankruptcy,
Right.
and you can probably buy it for 10 cents in the dollar. So he takes over the hotel, and the day that he has ownership of this hotel, goes into the hotel and invites all the workers, and there might be 400 of them, there could be 800 of them, and they're all a totally demoralized group. He invites all of them to come to the hotel ballroom where he's going to greet them, but he knows ahead of time that every single one of them is really demoralized.
Right.
They're going to lose the job because the new owner is probably going to clean house and hire his own friends. So there's father standing in front of, let's say, 400 people, knowing how discouraged and demoralized and maybe frankly scared, because if you lose your job at that point, there was 25% unemployment, and it probably meant the breadline. Well, so the first words out of father's mouth was always, every one of you keeps your job.
Yeah.
And then he said, I have a reason for wanting you to keep your job. I know that you know your job better than anybody else in the world. You know where you work and you know what the opportunities are. And my job is to give you the support and the encouragement and the resources to show the world just how good you are.
Yeah.
Is that cool? Because he said, people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations. And so he wanted to communicate to them the expectation that they were going to do great. And he said, you're going to see in the next few weeks, this hotel is going to turn around. It's going to be the best served, the most popular hotel in the whole city. And it's also going to be the most profitable, and your jobs are going to be the most secure. And together, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Cool? Well, the next day, if you're taking over a hotel that's gone bankrupt, of course you have to spend a lot of money refurbishing it. But he told me the first money he ever spent wasn't on the public areas where the paying public would see. No, it would be where the employees would work. Like, for example, the employee dining rooms, the employee showers, the employee lockers, the rickety old elevators. That's where the first money went. And again, I'm asking Father, why did you spend the money on the employees rather than the areas that the public would see? And he said, because the success depends on every level on the employees. They're the ones who are going to make it a success. So communicate to them how important they are and how much we believe in them. Cool?
It is cool, and it's amazing. And what's going through my mind, because I've had a lot of guests on this show where we've talked about leadership and we've talked about the requirements for change. what you're talking about is servant leadership, really, and or that's the word people would use today. And but he was so far ahead of his time. um, you
And
know,
the amazing thing is, when he was 26, he absolutely didn't know what he wanted to do. And my grandmother told my mother, don't marry Ernest because he can never stick to anything and you'll end up poor. And she said, I don't care. I love him. And they married anyway. Well, he went to a career guidance counselor to find out what to do because now he's got a wife. He's got to stick to something. And the career guidance counselor said, Mr. Henderson, you're a very bright guy. You should be a scientist, maybe working on a bench and not interacting with anybody. And Father took that as a challenge. He thought if his career guidance counselor said, you're absolutely no good at interacting with people, he made it his business to do things like, in his life that I know of, he took the Dale Carnegie course. He took he read How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said he read it every decade. He took public speaking courses. He made friends with psychologists. He just did everything that he could to figure out what makes people tick, how to motivate them. And so for somebody who was not innately gifted at it, I think he became better than most because he made a study of it.
Yeah. How can we extrapolate, the lessons that we're learning there, and put it in terms of advice for business owners today who have, they're hanging in there, Mitzi. There's a lot of them hanging in there, but just, I mean, what lessons are in there, or what would you add, from your own stories? Because there's so many that might be some good advice for people right now.
Well, for hanging in there, I was forever asking both my late husband and my late father how both men built companies that were Fortune 500 sized. Well, Father used to say that he felt his competitors would give up after 40 turn downs. He said that it was his policy to keep working on something until 100 leads. So, or put differently, he'd follow 100 leads where a competitor might give up at 40. So I think one of the things that, were Father alive today and he were to advise people, he'd certainly be telling them, don't get discouraged, because it might be the 90th thing that, or something Frank Perdue used to say, and Frank Perdue, since he's been gone 15 years, people may not be familiar with the name. He built an operation to one that on a very good year, we sell in 100 different countries. And he also had 20,000 employees at the time of his death. Well, he used to say that you never know which key turns the lock. So he would be forever trying things. And he didn't get discouraged by turn downs. What he and my father had in common, they had lots in common, but among them, they just didn't discourage easily.
That is a remarkable quote, and I'm going to make sure it might well be the title of this episode, because it really is true, isn't it? I mean, and it kind of goes back to the way people tend to view failure, especially in business. I mean, those of us that have and my success is far more modest than the men in your life. But one thing I do know for sure is that it's very difficult to predict when you're starting out with something. You might have something, oh man, this is going to be a home run. I'm so confident on this one, and it flops. And then and then you try something else and you think it really doesn't have a chance, but I'm just going to give it a shot. And the next thing you know, it's gone, eh?
Well, then I do need to add something about my father. And my grandmother saying he could never stick to anything. Actually, from age 26 to maybe age 33, he didn't have any success of any sort. He just went from one flop to another. He tried to get into the radio industry, and we're talking 1920s now. It wasn't a flop, but it didn't make money. He got into the importing business. He got into, heaven knows why, binoculars, German Shepherd dogs, just one thing after another. And he didn't hit his stride in any way until he got into the hotel industry. And then suddenly he had something that fit. Yeah. And you think that it wouldn't fit at all, given that he was diagnosed as somebody who had no people skills.
Yeah, exactly. And the hospitality.
Yeah. I mean, I could make a bet that except for a national politician, there were few people who, in the end, interacted with more people, because as a host of 400 hotels, I mean, you're interacting with people constantly. But his making a study of human nature, I think, put him ahead of the game.
Yeah, well, for sure. And it's a conversation that I've been having with a lot of people right now who are, especially early stage business owners. They've not faced the big levels of adversity. Like if they started their business in the last 5 or 10 years, things have been, since the financial crisis, things have been pretty upbeat. But they're early on, and now all of a sudden, the things got really rough, really fast, and
Incredibly fast.
yeah. And then there's this tendency to think, oh, well, I'm doomed because I'm gonna, I've lost all this money, and yet, when you use that mindset, you're forgetting the fact that you're nothing is ever really lost. You invest things, you learn, and the payback may come, down the line. But I'm pretty sure that when your father got into that hotel chain and it finally fit like a glove, it was partly because some of the other stuff that he hadn't been doing, they may actually even have been good business ideas, but it didn't fit like a glove. And that's the thing that I think is misunderstood. Some people can succeed in a business that another person would really struggle with, even though they might have very similar skills.
Well, it's clearly true in the case of my father, because all the people who owned those hotels before had lost everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the hotels went bankrupt, and yet he could turn them around. But he did, like my late husband, my late father, both felt that investing in people and making them, I mean, fathers used to say, inspire, don't require.
Oh my! I'm hoping all these things are written down somewhere, Mitzi, because
read my book. It's on
I'm
Amazon.
absolutely, yes. Give us the name and everything for people, because I absolutely must. Say it again though for.
Okay, the book is Tough Man, Tender Chicken, but there's an easier way of going after it rather than trying to remember a title.
Yeah.
And that is, I'm assuming that we're going on Amazon.
Yes.
If they'll look for Mitzi Perdue,
right,
and Purdue is spelled like chicken, not the university, and Mitzi is Mitzi, and Perdue is Perdue. They'll come to my. I've actually written several books.
Yes.
And in fact, I've written a brand new one. And I'm so excited because I have a co-author. And the co-author, I can't believe this. I've just died and gone to heaven. I'm so excited about who my co-author is. It's Mark Victor Hansen.
Oh, wow. Of course. He's a master storyteller. Jack Canfield told me off air that Mark is maybe the best storyteller that he's ever met. And probably was the best storyteller. So you did pretty well there.
As I said, I've died and gone to heaven with this collaboration. But it's called Survive and Thrive. And it's 40 tips for doing well during the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And a little piece of inside information about Mark Victor Hansen. That man writes like an angel. Insane rapidity. I mean, it's just hard to believe that somebody can produce good stuff so rapidly.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because I'm thinking of the story you told us about your dad, because what came to my mind is when I had Seth Godin on the show, and of course he's got 17 best-selling books on marketing, and that most of them are, even if they were written in 2000, they're still applicable today. So I said to him, I thought I was complimenting him, Mitzi, and I said, well, writing must come naturally to you. And it was the one time in the interview I could tell he got, visibly offended. He said, it didn't come naturally to me at all. I've just written so much that, written badly so often that I know how to write well, and I'm sure it was the same thing with Mark Victor. Like, he's written his entire lifetime, and the work that people go in, I think we had a skill point. I'm just speculating, but I'm sure it was that same with the way with your father. Like, he put in all that time and all those other things, but all that prepared him for the hotel industry in a way that probably nothing else could have.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yeah.
And even in my own life, but I'm not sure how much time we've got left, because
5 or 10 minutes at least, yeah. And we can go a little longer because your stories are remarkable.
Oh, thank you. But I'm thinking that even in my own life, on this story of discouragement and failure, I was hugely fortunate in that I had a really good education, and good Lord, what a background I was gifted with. But somewhere around age 34, I hadn't done anything with my life. The one thing that I had done was that I came into an inheritance at 28, and at age 34, I'd spent like 6 years investigating farmland in California and taking courses in rural appraisal and agronomy and agricultural accounting and just all sorts of things. And finally, after investigating like 50 different farms, I found one, I invested in it, and it was a rice farm. But I wasn't going to, I had some background in agriculture by this point, but not enough to run a large farm all by myself.
Right.
So I hired a tenant farmer. The tenant farmer had an IQ over 200.
Wow.
And Einstein, for comparison, had an IQ of 180. Well, this guy, after I had hired him, an article about him came out in Psychology Today. And we're talking like 1974 at this point. The article talked about how the Stanford Binet IQ tests were calibrated with 40 people who had IQs that were over 200, and it told what happened to them. Most of them ended up suicides or alcoholics or ended up in car accidents that shouldn't have. Almost every one of them had abnormal and unhappy lives. And the one exception was there was this rice grower in Northern California. And it's the person who was my tenant farmer. But he had a story that totally influenced my life. And his story, this incredibly gifted man, and I knew him when he was in his I hired him when he was in his mid-60s. His story was that he knew he had this incredible IQ, and he was going to write a great book that would benefit humanity, and it was going to be called Life, an Owner's Manual. But at every age, he was collecting, file cabinets full of information on this great book that he was going to write. But by age 65, he hadn't written it. And shortly after he became my tenant, and I was fond of this man. I mean, he was just a wonderful human being. But somewhere around mid-60s, late 60s, he was diagnosed with terminal heart disease. And they didn't think they could keep him alive long enough to have open heart surgery. And so it was like a death sentence. And if you and I learn that we have just irreversible, terribly heart, a death sentence, it's really depressing. But for him, there was an added layer of depression, which was that his whole life he had been building up towards writing the great book. One thing, and now he was going to die and not have a chance to do it. But the story takes a twist. Let's call him Peter Smith to protect the guilty.
All right.
Peter heard about the Pritikin Clinic in Southern California that is very big on diet and exercise and meditation and just everything you can think of. And a month later, he had lost 10 pounds. He was able to walk like 10 miles without terrible pain. And in the end, he lived another 30 years.
Wow.
Okay, so he had this wonderful good news where this miracle happened, where diet, exercise, and mental attitude just changed everything. And so I told him, Peter, this is the best news in the world. Write your book.
Yeah.
And he said, yes, I just need to do a little bit more research and I'll be ready. And I think you can guess the rest of the story. He never did write it.
Yeah.
But the super rest of the story is, or the PS to the story is, that changed my life, because I realized why he hadn't acted on writing his book. I believe, and I knew him well enough to be pretty sure this is true, that what kept him back was fear of failure. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking, I want to be a writer. I want to be a communicator. I'd like to be in television, but I'm so afraid of, the audition where I get turned down or the rejection slips from writing. I'm going to redefine failure. And for me, from now on, failure is going to be not giving it my all, not trying in every way that I possibly could. And that every rejection slip I got, I would regard it as a badge of honor, or either that or as paying the price of that, or paying my dues. And within 1 year of completely changing my mind that I wouldn't mind flunking an audition, I got a job in television.
Yeah.
I got a job in radio. This is simultaneous. And I had a syndicated column. And all of, they were accompanied by plenty of times of falling on my face. But in the end, I became a nationally syndicated column. My column went to 420 newspapers. But I'm not sure that any of these good things that came my way would have happened if I hadn't had the example of Peter Smith and redefining failure.
Yeah. It's a powerful, powerful story. And I mean, the results speak for themselves, but we've talked about failure on this show so much. It's the one thing we must do a much better job addressing with our youth. Because you were blessed and I was too, but to be raised in families where there were examples around. In this case, Peter came into your life type of thing. But we're raising our kids to assume that failure is bad and that failure is not reaching a specific objective or whatever. So, I mean, I thank you so much for sharing that story, because failure, I think, as we get a little older too, we don't regret having tried something that didn't work. I mean, I don't know, when I look back, I don't say, oh, I'm really sorry I tried that. I mean, that's not.
I think the getting to the point where you failed at something, you probably put yourself in the way of learning new skills, meeting new people, maybe attending conventions or reading books. Yeah. You're a bigger person and you're on a higher plateau to make the next assault on the goal that you want to achieve.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Mitzi, this advice has been fabulous. The stories are fascinating. I could honestly talk to you all day, and I don't know whether I might be able to convince you to come back sometime, but I'd love to have you. But listen, again, I guess the best thing to say is for people that want to find you, for all of your books, just go to Amazon. Mitzi Perdue will, of course, put the links in the episode pages. Anywhere else people could reach out to learn more about you?
I'm so glad you asked. I'd love it if they would come to my website, and it's MitziPerdue.com.
Perfect. And again, we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so kindly for being on my show. It's been a fascinating conversation.
I've loved every second. Thank you so much.